you. My name is Angel Falconer. I have the honor of being the newest HLA board member and very grateful to have been asked to moderate this panel. Let's see, so y'all know why you're here. Natural disasters exacerbated by climate change present existential challenges for Oregon communities, particularly for those who are already marginalized. However, efforts to plan for these threats can run counter to our equally critical housing goals. This panel will highlight research on how flood and wildfire-prone areas navigate this challenge, as well as a project on the coast, which incorporates resiliency from the ground up. So in my day job, I have a little bit of a personal interest in this topic because I have the privilege of working with a team who represents a class of 2020 Labor Day fires victims. Some of them lost everything. So I've spent a little bit of time reflecting on the challenges that we'll discuss on this topic. In my previous life, I was not an opera singer. I was a city councilor in the city of Milwaukee. Our planning commission and our city council would often grapple with the tension between the critical need to build housing and also our responsibility to plan for threats from increasingly powerful storms and other weather events driven by climate change. Chatting earlier today with some planners, I won't point you out, but we were sort of wondering about, whether some of the same fights that I would see at those hearing rooms would break out today. I hope not, but I do know that there are a lot of very smart, passionate people in the room who care deeply about these two topics and the intersection. So I hope that you'll join us for a very lively discussion. And with that, I will introduce our panel. We have with us Elena Taylor-Doss. She joins us. She has a special interest in collaborative governance and hazard planning. Elena is contemplating her master's in public policy at Oregon State University. She's a graduate project assistant at OSU's Fire Extension Program and OSU's Policy Analysis Lab, working on projects centered around wildfire preparedness. Her research aims to highlight proactive, mitigative, and adaptive policy models for environmental hazards and other considerations for fostering collaborative community networks. We also have Katie and Kevin Shluka of Coyote Gardens, Inc. They join us. They lead the development team for the Kingfisher Apartments, a 23-unit workforce housing complex in the heart of Pacific City. They own and operate a small landscaping business on the Oregon coast, specializing in the design and installation of organic gardens. The Kingfisher is their first development project. We also have Trisha Patterson. Trisha Patterson is graduating in June with her Master of Public Policy from Oregon State University. Trisha studies housing, disaster planning, and how institutions hold it all together. She strongly believes that we can have nice things and continually inspired to advance fair and equitable housing and land use planning processes to foster resilient communities. And with that, let's get started.
Hi, thank you for the introduction. I'm Elena. Just as a refresher, and today I'm going to talk to you guys about reaching consensus in the age of fire. I know a very dramatic title. It's still in the works, but to give some background, my identified problem is the rise in severity and occurrence of wildfires in the Pacific West. And so that also includes California, especially since they are quite ahead of us in wildfire preparations. In Oregon, the 2020 wildfires were much more extensive and impactful, as most were in timber, resulting in 1 million acres burned. The fire consumed at least 4,500 structures and 9 people lost their lives. And so in 2019, Senate Bill 762 was proposed to the Oregon State Senate. And then following the 2020 wildfires, we saw a policy window open. And with this policy window, the bill was enacted in June 25th, 2021, and was designed to assist Oregon in modernizing and improving wildfire preparedness through 3 key strategies. First, they outline creating fire-adapted communities. Second, developing a safe and effective response. Third, increasing the resilience of Oregon's landscape. The bipartisan legislation implicated 14 state agencies and allocated approximately $220 million to address wildfire mitigation and adaptation in Oregon. And in total, it outlines 15 objectives to address this. The top priorities, which has been outlined by existing literature, is to define and establish classes of the wildland-urban interface, to develop the statewide wildfire risk map, the establishment of local defensible space requirements, the development of landscape resilience and fuel reduction programs, and establishment of small forest grant programs. And this is going to be a slide more so as an informational slide, but I'll be talking about the defensible space requirements and new building codes since they relate to my research. For defensible space requirements, this will give financial, administrative, technical, or other assistance provided to local governments for administrating and enforcing defensible space. Defensible space is a buffer that homeowners can create on their property. This can be managed through the types of plants they have, the tree coverage, and then also the type of litigation they have, or not litigation, the type of water management they have on the property. And then also I'm looking at the new building code standards, which will have additions to existing dwellings and future dwellings in extreme and in high wildfire risk zones. These new building codes will actually be established following the publication of the map, which is the state wildfire risk map. And this map is going to set extreme, high, moderate, low, and no risk class, parcel class for Oregon. And so the fun good map, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is of this map, but it has created a fun conversation, especially within wildfire management. Yeah. So yeah, it was originally released in June 2022, and OSU published it in conjunction with ODF and the State Fire Marshal's Office. It considered topography, climate, weather, and vegetation in determining parcel level classifications. There was also a layer on the Wildfire Explorer that identified socially and economically vulnerable communities. And this is a vital step to the bill because it informs which communities will be required to uphold the regulations and protocols outlined. And as you note, the red and orange are our high and extreme zones, and then the yellow to green and blue are going to be our moderate to no risk zones. And so what are my questions? I am looking at how did state agencies interpret their roles and responsibility in 762? And then I'm also looking at the barriers and opportunities agencies have experienced in conducting community outreach for this bill. And my overarching question is, how might consensus be achieved in wildfire preparedness state legislation? To address this question, I have quite a few methods that I'm using. I first started by interviewing Jackson County residents who are in a high and extreme zone. And I'm also in the process of interviewing agency representatives from ODF, OSU, and then hopefully the State Fire Marshal's Office. I also did a thematic coding of wildfire risk map community information session that was held in Medford, Oregon in July of 2022. I'm doing a few literature reviews. I looked at best practices for CWPP creation publications, and I'm currently looking at Oregon County CWPPs that were published before 2010. I'm looking at community outreach on Senate Bill 762 by selected agencies preceding the publication of the map. And then I'm also completing a cost benefit analysis of Senate Bill 762 on the defensible space and home hardening regulations and requirements. And finally, to wrap it up, I did a quantitative analysis of ODF risk map appeals. This was doing a 21 code thematic code book, and it included both call-in, written, and electronic appeals, which was quite a few. So our top 3 counties were Jackson, Deschutes, and Josephine's County, and they were quite frustrated, to say the least, about the map. while I won't be expressing any of the comments in those appeals today, hopefully they'll be public soon, and it is a nice, fun, light reading. And when we looked at these appeal changes, we actually saw our two top categories were high to moderate and high to low. And these changes would mean that they would no longer be responsible for upholding the new regulations that would be in place. And these are a few of the quotes that I captured in the Senate bill hearing in Medford. The top themes that we saw was interpretational differences of risk. A lot of people cited arson, and it should have been included in the map. We also saw a distrust in government management. A lot of people cited how BLM land is being managed currently, and certain Forest Service involvement with the bill. We also see insurance concerns. That has most likely been the most prevalent concern that we've seen. A lot of people are very confused on why their insurance is reaching out to them during the same time the map was published, which was a coincidence. And then we have a distrust in science that we're seeing. Most people stated that there was no analysis, there's no study. We saw a lot of people cite that no one ever actually came out to their property. And so how do we define science in the age of comprehensive environmental problems? And then bringing it down to a localized view. When asked if they thought the regulations would help, we saw a split. 30% felt that it doesn't, they do not think it will help, versus 30% did feel that they would help. And when asked about awareness of programs and regulations, while a majority of our participants were aware, very few actually cited Senate Bill 762. They had cited older regulations in place, especially for defensible space. And then when seeking assistance, most people cited their neighbors were seeking assistance. However, they felt that their dispensable space was up to protocol. Notably, I would like to point out, though, that with our respondents, we had a high volume response that we're actively doing fuel management practices on their property, and a lot of them had experience with wildfires. And we defined experience either through wildfighting, having a fire come up to their property, or personally having their property burn. And then the general, it was a wide range, but generally we saw about $1,000 to $2,000 investment, with our highest being $32,000 invested in their defensible space and $100 invested in their defensible space. So seeing that I'm still in the process of kind of wrapping this up, these are a few of my findings and considerations that I've noticed so far. You do see a difference between reactive and proactive community outreach. Currently, we see more reactive community outreach versus proactive, which has resulted in more issues rather than benefits. We also see a need for region-specific communication models, extensive knowledge on audience, the balanced conversation dynamics, framing, and then accessibility. A lot of these populations in these high-risk zones are notably older. About 10% of these populations actually are older through census demographics. And so meeting them halfway and how they respond to our communication styles is really important looking forward. And then also interagency collaboration, seeking consensus among agencies and their role and how we define our roles among each other is a really big step, especially with these new age environmental bills. And then rebuilding or improving social acceptability. And so that is public trust and agency management, public experience with science, public understanding of science, and then community scale and collaborative networking. Fortunately, that's all I have for you today. But I am presenting my research at the end of the summer. I hopefully will have a more comprehensive view, but it is a quite interesting topic. And if anybody wants to talk a little bit more about it after, I'd be happy to chat a little, but thank you for your time.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. We're Kevin and Katie Shluka. Get to our first slide here. 16 or so years ago, Katie started our business, Coyote Gardens in southern Tillamook County. It's a landscape company, she said, specializing in creating coastal and organic gardens. Our business connects us with a lot of diverse aspects of our community. You know, we're part of the construction industry. We also work with a good portion of local environmental concerns, like the Watershed Council, and we know a good portion of the area's citizens and leaders. So when we decided to do something about our local housing crisis, we knew who to ask for help, and we proceeded not with profit as our primary concern, but with the goal to create healthy habitat, which is very much the same goal we have in our business. So the Kingfisher, rendered here, is a 23-unit building designed for long-term rentals at workforce rates. A lot of our presentation here focuses on the nuts and bolts of just getting the structure built. In order to make these apartments climate resilient and climate friendly, we frankly needed a bit of luck in finding an appropriate building site, and we needed to manage our expenses efficiently in order to afford, in quotations, the luxury of a place-based design and a landscape that would make the Kingfisher both climate resilient and climate friendly. Much of our presentation, therefore, may feel a little off topic, but for better or worse, the financial and bureaucratic goes hand in hand with the environmental. So there we go. Our first step was to select the right piece of land. On the coast, as demonstrated in this map, the areas sort of central to our towns and communities coincide with special areas of flood hazard. So if you were to find a suitable parcel of land that would be, you know, within walking distance of mass transportation or riding distance of a grocery store or other services, chances are you are going to be dealing with either a tsunami zone or a flood zone or the floodway. If you were fortunate enough to find a parcel of land that physically fits the bill, it'll also need to be zoned appropriately too. If in that zoning multifamily is not an outright allowable, but instead a conditionally allowable use, then you'll need to design the structure prior to acquiring your land use permits. So this is the site plan for our building, and I've outlined in red the delineation of the flood hazard area. So you can see we managed to keep the structure. Not a lot of rooms would get this. Yeah. Okay. We just managed to keep the structure out of this. This has real world implications. One, in terms of cost, certainly not just construction costs, but ongoing insurance costs. But there's also an element of safety and assurance that it provides to our tenants. But perhaps more importantly than all of that, it correlates with a real world situation on the ground, real world topography. And so the fact that our building sort of follows that topography has design implications that are positive. It fits the landscape. And we owe a lot of credit to our design team at Jones Architecture, which is a Portland-based company, although Alan Jones, the principal, has a place in Pacific City. They did an absolutely wonderful job at creating an efficient building. It looks and functions wonderfully within its unique environment. And it was an enormously rewarding investment we made, having found a really good team of architects. By the way, they're also responsible for the renderings. Here's one rendering that when I first saw it, made me quite emotional, actually, because Katie and I have lived outside of Pacific City for almost the last 20 years. And within Pacific City, we've never known a child to have been born and raised there. And so when I saw this corner unit with what I assume is a mother pointing out probably a pelican to her son or daughter, that really made me excited for this project. The property we brought for this project was zone C2 neighborhood commercial. It's an all residential structure requiring 15-foot setbacks from the front and side. The property also in its particular zone had a 24-foot height restriction that might necessitate a flat roof, which is a difficult proposition both structurally and aesthetically on the coast. This all posed a unique problem that meant we would probably have to add a variance request to our conditional use application. We needed some additional allowance on the height of the building. And we also needed to push the building as far to the west as possible, which is away from the river that you see there. The reason for this was to create as much distance as possible from the river, from sensitive riparian areas and the flood zone, as you saw. And the second reason, oddly, was that that property has an east-facing slope, and the more we push the property into the slope, the more advantageous it was, according to the equation the county uses to determine allowable building height. It would give us extra headroom and perhaps the ability with a modest variance to do a sloped roof rather than a flat roof. The idea of headroom and a sloped roof plays really importantly into an easily overlooked concept that I think is an integral consideration towards workforce and affordable housing and climate resiliency, and that's the issue of dignity. If we're looking to build housing that will survive the increasing climatological vagaries that we anticipate, then it's equally important to design for dignified circumstances using enduring materials. Really, we've only created a new problem if the houses we're building look like they're falling apart in 10 years. We shouldn't be really in the mindset of storing people. We really want them to be homed. And if a home imparts stability and imparts dignity, it'll pay great dividends for the tenants, for their employers, because that dignity really means something through the course of a day, for the neighbors, and for the entire community. On the other hand, if a complex ages quickly, it will likely create a negative feedback loop that limits future investment and maintenance and diminishes pride of ownership. It's a tough sell to make. The investments, in handsome design, landscaping, interior volume, et cetera, particularly in our current economy. Look closely at this one. The price and availability of building materials have skyrocketed these last 2 years. Interest rates are making it more difficult to pencil these projects too. This is our receipt for the sewer and water connections, the SDCs with the sewer and water. And I wish I could tell you that this receipt was like a publisher's clearinghouse style check that you get from that man. But if you bought a headless Barbie at a garage sale, it would come on this receipt.
Good one.
There's no way around most of these expenses. And our secret sauce to get there involved a shameless and continuous appeal to all parties involved for free or reduced services, for grassroots solutions from knowledgeable locals, for creative financing, for state and county incentives, or incentives from local businesses and organizations, for elbow grease, but probably most importantly, emphasizing to our investors, our private investors, this is a for-profit project, the need for low expectations on their financial returns and high expectations on the social returns. We really pushed a double bottom line on this project. So as an aside, and I apologize, this is kind of where I'm straying from the topic of climate resiliency. We paid for 2 appraisals a little over 1 year apart. Again, I want to import the fact that we were able to save money where we needed to and earn money, in this case, where we needed to, in order to make the decisions we were able to make that make this project climate resilient and climate friendly. So as you can see, in a little over a year apart, there's a pretty big difference in the appraisals there. And I wish I could tell you it was an exact science. It's not. So when you get an appraisal, if you get a good one, it makes a world of difference when you're talking to lending institutions. You really need to provide for the appraiser tons of unabashedly rose-tinted background on the project. And if you don't like their conclusions, send them polite reasons to reconsider. And if they don't reconsider, get another appraisal. It's painful, it's costly, it's time consuming, but it's well worth it. So this slide, I've outlined the zones in unincorporated Tillamook County that allow for fourplexes or smaller as an outright use. They're outlined in red. The zones that allow for larger multifamily are in polka dots, or they're in chartreuse, or it doesn't really matter. There are none. It's generally assumed that the county was a big roadblock in this process, and people are fond of defaulting to our Department of Community Development as sort of the standard scapegoat in all things red tape. We approached community development early and often, and frankly, unceasingly. And the folks we worked with were very, very smart. They're very diligent, and they provided invaluable assistance helping us through the long and confusing, arduous, and frankly, soul-crushing process. We won approval at every stage of permit and appeal. Tillamook County Planning Commission decision was appealed. Then the Board of County Commissioners decision was appealed. Then LUBA was appealed all the way to the Oregon State Court of Appeals. It cost us a lot of money. It cost our detractors a lot of money, but it cost the county an enormous amount of money. The amount of work that community development, public works, and county council had to put into this to see it through cost a ton of money. A lot of expense and energy that's being lost fighting NIMBY in the courts should be going towards making housing more affordable and better. Homes can be created that are in harmony with the environment, dignified and enduring, but every penny and every ounce of energy needs to go towards the tangibles. Not spent fighting folks who misunderstand the import of attainable housing to a healthy community. The bar for appeals, I think, needs to be higher, or alternatively, the disincentives like counterclaims for legal reimbursement need to be stronger, or even better, zoning needs to be more inclusive, avoiding the opportunities for appeal altogether. So, one last consideration. Like all of the coast and much of the country, South Tillamook County is a long-term rental desert. The nearest multifamily rentals to the south of us are in Lincoln City, about 24 miles away. To the north in Tillamook, about 20 miles away. Actually, I have that backwards. Tillamook is 24, Lincoln City is 20 miles away. To the east, it's about 40 miles away, and to the west, it's about 2,600 miles away. Within that area I just described, there's literally hundreds of vacation rentals that are usually empty. So if we want to talk climate resiliency, if we want to talk climate friendliness, there's a lot of available land and available resources that are going towards empty houses. This problem is very much like our global food supply. It's not necessarily a question of supply, but a question of distribution. And I think that's a really, really important consideration when we're considering the overall equation. So thank you very much.
Thanks. What? You can keep clapping. That was He's great. Thank you so much for setting that up for me. Yeah, there we go. Okay. So hi, can you hear me okay? It's good.
I could just yell. Okay. So my name is Trisha Patterson. I'm a master's of public policy student at Oregon State. I go to school with Elena, and I'm here to talk to you about kind of a continuation of the Kingfisher apartments. They're a major case study in my work, and I'm here to talk to you about the hazards housing nexus, some resilient coastal housing strategies. What does that mean? Do those exist? First, I want to give a land acknowledgement. I'm sure this was down at the beginning. I'm sure that it's in your heads throughout this day together, but I think it's personally important for me to acknowledge the room that we're in, the land that we're in this conversation that we're having. And Kevin, you gave a great introduction to this of why study housing and hazards. What's the connection here? That these are inextricably linked. These challenges vary in scale. There's the Cascadia subduction zone earthquake that we are all viscerally aware of, but there's also smaller scale, more common hazards like flooding that you had to contend with, right? And then there's also this issue of housing, a housing shortage, especially on the coast. And the ways, so my project really studies the ways that these are linked
the ways that they consider each other, and each sphere is exacerbated by the other. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so this is a photo of the 1964 Tillamook earthquake. So there was an earthquake that occurred off of the coast of Alaska, and it sent a tsunami down. I think only 4 people died technically, but it was very expensive, $1 million in damage. And this is from the Tillamook Headlight Herald. It can cause some damage, right? So these things are alive in our memory. This is within living memory. The role of governance. I approach this from a public policy perspective, as one should. It's my degree. And in exploring the role of governance in institutions, right? My degree is in public policy, my background, I'm looking at how institutions influence or enable community adaptation from a new institutional economics point of view. A good quote that I've carried with me throughout my research is that public policy should facilitate the development of institutions that bring out the best in humans. And then I have a question for the audience. Who said this? Do we know? There are institutional scholars among us. Eleanor Ostrom, right? She wrote Governing the Commons. She has actually this amazing background history. Y'all should look her up. She was an adjunct hire at the University of Indiana. Her husband got the big tenure job. They gave her a small office, and she started collecting case studies about governance and institutions and resources, and wrote a book and received the Nobel Prize in Economics in 2009 for it. Amazing. I think she recently died, so she's not with us anymore. But this photo is of Astoria, Oregon. I show this photo to kind of ground us in this idea that institutions make choices, they make trade-offs. I show this photo because the city of Astoria chose to not include seismic upgrades when they redid their city hall. Oh, here we go. And the kingfisher. So I'll be talking about this later. Kevin, you set this up really well for me. You gave all of the background. So kingfisher. So we know that hazards are a part of coastal living. It's just a part of life. Are there resiliency-driven housing production strategies, and do our institutions enable us to get there? That was my guiding question. My research questions included these. I looked at how are coastal planning institutions enabling adaptation. So not is the institution itself adaptive, but how is it enabling community adaptation? What is the relationship between coastal hazard mitigation planning and goal-based comprehensive planning? How do they consider each other? Do planners look at hazard mitigation plans? That was a very simple question that I asked. And are there housing strategies that are safer in a hazard and meet coastal housing needs? So this fall, so those are my questions. How did I ask those questions? I talked to a lot of people. I conducted interviews. I talked to 20 people between 4 stakeholder groups, planners, hazard mitigation specialists, developers, 1 architect, and housing advocacy nonprofits. There we go. Oh, okay. No, this wasn't supposed to be in here, so we're skipping past this. No. Okay. So what did they say? Right? That was my framework, but we're not going to talk about that today. So what did they say? We got the 4 L's: land, lumber, labor, and laws. That's what affects housing. We know that. Also, housing design, architecture, building codes, hugely important. Location, community characteristics. These are all things that influence housing resiliency. So my question, are there housing production strategies that enable resiliency? Yes, and thank God. I was happy to know that there are strategies that are currently being implemented that have these co-benefits. So one of them was hold on to what we have. It's kind of like maintain what we have, maintain where we are, talking about continued integration of natural hazards plans into community comprehensive plans. We also know that denser housing types are safer. Triplexes are built to the commercial code. That's what I've been told. And that there are ASCE building, tsunami resilient building standards. And that process of codification from getting to a standard to a code can sometimes be arduous, but it is possible and is frequently done. Another thing that my interviews told me is to consider updating risk categories for housing, to update them to be safe enough to stay. That would be a category 4. That came from architects. And then always continued education and community outreach about these hazards. The other half of this coin is considering moving communities to safer areas. This would be like a managed retreat kind of strategy. So that's utilizing hazard mitigation as a basis for UGB expansion. That was top of the list for a lot of people that I talked about. Mentorship of coastal developers, new coastal developers. When I asked y'all, Kevin and Katie, would you do this again? They said, I don't know, because it was so hard. It was really hard. And I'll get to them. I'll come back to them on why they were successful. My last one here is streamlining and simplifying zoning codes. The county planners that I talked to said that they would like to see updated model codes from the state. They want more resources from the state. So we know, right? We know what we need to do, but will our institutions allow it? That was really exemplified in this example of the Kingfisher apartments. That's wrong. It's a 23 unit, not a 25. But they were special, right? They are workforce affordable. They had flood hazard considerations. That was top of their mind when they first embarked on this journey. And it's right in the heart of Pacific City. So it's denser, it's infill homes. But it took 4 years. I don't know if you really stress that. It took 4 years to permit and develop. And statewide, the statistic is that it takes 7 months for a single family new home to be permitted and start building. So the discrepancy there is pretty huge. Yeah. So why were they successful? From my institutional lens of what enabled them to be successful, first, it was that they were persistent. They were so persistent. And also that they had a highly localized building team. That was something that you really stressed to me, was that everybody was local. They had mentorship from other coastal developers, people who were building in their area. They had the mentorship from the community development team. They were reaching out proactively. They could name people, able to name the folks who were, had their back essentially. And they had their own thoughtful developer vision and passion. And I want to go back actually, because I want to continue to uplift that point that they made about the first architect's rendering. That when I asked them, how will you know if you're successful? They said, children. We will hear children in our communities. We will see young people in our communities. And I just wanted to uplift that again and spend some time on that, it's important. This idea of community.
Can I also add, I'd like to add that we will hopefully see more people of color as well. And that looks
Exactly.
Quite community.
Exactly. So it was a housing success story that almost didn't happen. From my perspective, and I know from probably many of yours, if I had gone up against that many hurdles, I don't know if that project would have been successful, as successful as it is. Most, I mean, housing delayed is housing denied, right? And so what are the consequences of this institutional preference for public involvement? This is sometimes described as a hijacking of the public process, an institutional prioritization of goal 1. And we saw that as well at the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis amendments hearing. I think it was 2 Tuesdays ago. Rep. Dexter made this same comment that shouldn't say that the public process has been hijacked. She said there should be parity amongst the goals, that goal 1 should be equal to goal 10. And these cause inequities in housing choice, right? So how is this being addressed? Like I said, with ONA, local advocacy, very persistent local developers, and then also folks who are working to codify ASCE tsunami resilient building standards into the code. So in sum, there's a lot of contending issues, right? And especially as we look forward to the next 50 years of land use planning in Oregon, and we are rewriting goal 10, and we're considering climate in housing, and we're faced with almost a new set of challenges, a new paradigm, and coastal institutions, planning institutions face these concurrent environmental and social challenges. Institutions shape social practices and are themselves shaped. They change and can be changed. And that, I think, is its strength. That gives me hope that we can change. We can have positive influence. Yeah. Stakeholders are already engaging. The 20 people that I talked to this fall are already engaging in these adaptive actions, and there is an appetite for more. The coast can sometimes be forgotten, I think, in sometimes of statewide housing conversations, but there was collaboration happening. There was intra-jurisdictional conversations, leadership happening. And so they're already doing it. And then what's on the horizon? So I have a bit at the end, about my funding source. It's the Cascadia COPES Hub. So it's the Cascadia Coastlines and People Hazards Hub. It's an NSF grant funded collaboratory. OSU Extension Services as well, Elena. So if we have questions about the COPES Hub, I can get into that, but I just want to offer thank you so much. I know that I'm the last person to speak at the end of a very long day, and so I'm so grateful for your time and attention. I am looking for a job starting in June. Shameless plug, shameless plug. And then I think that's it. ONA update is that it passed out of House Housing on Tuesday. It's being incorporated into House Bill 2001, which the irony is not lost on me. I love that. And it's fast tracked to passage. So upwards and onwards.
Yeah. Oh, sure. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you so much. That was really inspiring, also a little depressing. No, I don't mean it that way. I have a call to I agree with you. And I'm gonna have a little call to action. Run for office and change the system, or show up at these hearings are happening all over the state all the time, and there's probably a development near you that needs your love and support. I don't have any open questions here, but I do want to kick us off because we did have one come in in advance of the panel today. It comes from Eleanor Ponomaroff, she's with the Talent City Council. As you know, that city, of course, was deeply affected by the 2020 fires. Lots of loss. She asks some questions related to, that intersection of housing and resilience. She says, the questions I would ask have to do with equity. Our data shows that homeowners are recovering from the Alameda fire disaster far faster than renters, seniors, people of color, and folks with lower income. What's more, once houses start coming back, some people seem to feel that the recovery is taking care of itself, market forces, and forget about the folks still struggling to get back, and may even resent resources directed towards getting those folks housed when the crisis seems to be in our rear view mirror. Years after a disaster, how do we ensure that displaced folks still struggling to find permanent housing in their communities continue to stay on our radar of the public local government, and that we don't fall into a business as usual posture when there is still a need? I wondered if you all had some reactions to that. And I guess sort of relatedly, how can local governments combat the gentrification that seems inevitable after a natural disaster? I wanted to open that up to see if you all had some reflections on that, or maybe to inspire some questions. I don't see anybody at the mic yet, but thank you.
I have some thoughts. Do you have some thoughts? You go.
Oh, okay.
Elena.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so I currently completed a CWPP best practices recommendations for counties. They're in the process of redoing theirs. And some of the key findings that I found in existing literature actually relates back to vulnerable population registries, which is this idea of using existing data and then also going out into your community and actually getting to know these populations and finding grass top people to first facilitate collaboration and conversation with these people, but also have an idea of what these populations will need in designing that post-fire recovery. Most CWPPs are very effective in designing preemptive measures and during fire measures on like how they will actually address it, but post-fire reactions have not been as strong, and that will actually be a huge emphasis, I feel, in the new revisions that we'll be seeing moving forward. But there is a huge understanding that there needs to be more inclusion, especially as we can see that there are currently still populations that are displaced, and I'm assuming that's what Trisha, I'll let Trisha talk on that a little more.
Yeah, I was going to comment that climate gentrification is this emerging term in the literature, and that we know that disasters, whether they're climate related or geologic disasters, that they break open existing inequalities. And there's really interesting work being done in my research group, actually, about a queer methodology to disaster risk reduction and incorporating queer and epistemologies into disaster risk frameworks, because normally those disaster risk frameworks are geared towards, like you're saying, homeowners, single family, nuclear family, and they don't consider multi-generational families. They don't consider alternative family structures. Folks, if your first language isn't English, citizenship status, they don't, that's not their first look, right? The mainstream disaster risk reduction frameworks. But then when it comes to displacement, maybe like elaborate a little bit more on that.
Well, I don't have a firm number, but I want to say about 5,000 people are still displaced after the 2020 wildfires. And so there can be preemptive measures in place to where if you were to do more of an equitable stance when designing your CWPP plans, generally you hear the phrase of equality within planning. However, shifting it to more of an equitable stance within hazard planning tends to be more of an effective model, especially since hazards can affect communities differently. As shown by homeowners, they had the resources to rebuild their houses. And so these models that we're designing, especially within CWPPs, should be best serving the communities that will be impacted the most. And that's why, it's going back to having multiple translations of the plans, going out, having registries of these communities, and then making those connections before the fire event, rather than, so that roots back to that proactive outreach rather than reactive outreach in that general sense.
Yeah, and I think with that, like, one thing that really came up in interviews was a community that is resilient to hazards is also a really great place to live in normal everyday life. A place that is walkable, where you know your neighbors, is safe, you feel a sense of community, is also, you know, it serves both needs. And so there's this idea of blue skies planning and versus gray skies. And so incorporating equity from the get-go, that is your first thought. That's a critical part. And that's where that institutional change comes in, that the inception of these institutions was not on equity. So how do we change that? How do we adapt to that?
Thank you very much. We have a question or a comment.
No, I have a question for the Kingfisher project. Could you tell us I guess, best argument against the project? What was the content of the people fighting you? I didn't understand that.
I think it was kind of smack dab in the beginning of the pandemic. And quite frankly, I think there were some people on the street that just thought it was a conspiracy. They didn't really understand why we would be doing this, because it didn't seem to be for a great amount of profit. We had people say to us things like, why are you building it there? That is a beautiful lot. You should be building condos there. You know, and our whole point was everybody deserves to live at the beach. You know, this is not just a place for the privileged. And I think in some ways people just thought that it was going to wreck and change their community, just sort of a fear of the unknown, a fear of people that maybe weren't just like them. But the hardest part for us was there was a lot of misinformation spread. I mean, it was just incredible. And so there were a lot of people that were against it, and we would kind of see those people on Facebook saying things and call them and say, you know, just wanted to reach out and see what questions you have. And I noticed you said some things that weren't actually true. And do you want to meet and look at the plans? And, you know, it really didn't seem to matter. People didn't really want to hear the truth. They really just wanted something to fight against. So it was a very small number of people too, but we had a lot of
very
support.
notable to me though, that you were like, you could call them and be like, hey, so I saw you at the grocery store. You want to tell me what's up with these comments? Like, it's a community. You are really in the community. Yes. Yeah.
Hello. I definitely, hopefully this is an observation that turns into a question, or maybe I can drop it down and you pick it up. I'm getting exceedingly tired of the idea that people who do not live in local communities get to extract wealth from them while not bearing personal responsibility, boots on the ground, to surviving crisis. And is there a way that, I don't know, in terms of whether it ends up being a land value tax, or we look at the different partnerships between private and public entities, say, for example, Blair B&B, there's a company that rhymes with it, where it's like, you're taking a lot of value directly out of these communities for years. And the idea that people cannot grow up in a place where they literally have to live and may suffer a tsunami, that metaphysics doesn't pencil out for me. So that's one observation / question. And then the secondly for Coyote Gardens is like, how are there ways in which environmental resilience strategies can not only make projects more feasible, but also argue for the beauty aspect of living around? Because I've worked in a sustainable landscaping company called Symbiote myself for about half a year. And it's just really amazing to see that you can have more beauty and more ecological diversity and fecundity by literally just putting roots in the ground, like metaphorically, but also very much important physically. And those two things from this presentation are the things that most weighed in my mind. Thank you.
So I assume the first portion of the question was primarily about vacation rentals, short-term rentals. I mean, there's another aspect to money leaving our community, and that's in the construction itself of a lot of these homes, because generally speaking, we've seen in our 20-year career, we've seen contractors disappear from the coast and start coming in from the valley. So that money for construction is leaving our community because there's no place for contractors to live or their labor. And then same goes with vacation homes. It's really a fraction of the services, takes a fraction of the services that a lived-in home would provide, you know, in terms of landscaping, house cleaning, shopping at the grocery store, going to the restaurants. And it's really, I'm not going to profess to have the answer to that, but Lincoln County to our south and now Tillamook County is grappling with it in very sincere, conscientious ways. And so stay tuned is the right answer to that one.
I have one point too, which I thought was kind of interesting. So our local schools actually waived our excise tax for the apartments because they said that if we have families there with kids, that'll actually bring money into the schools. They actually need more kids in the schools that will help them make money. And they're hoping to pre-lease a couple apartments too for teachers. So, I mean, this is like a really dire situation. It's also, you know, firefighters and police are living outside the county, commuting 45 minutes or more. So if you think about in an emergency, when you have a tsunami happen, for example, and you have 85% of the people are there on vacation, that's going to be mayhem. You know, even if you just have a small portion of people that live and work in the community and know what you do in these sorts of events, that's going to bring about some resiliency for sure.
I love your second question too about the power of landscape and beauty. And, you know, like so much of this project, the proof is going to be in the pudding. And it does track back to all these vacation homes because people that own vacation homes will not put much investment in the landscape. And it's understandable. We, on the other hand, really have set a goal of creating sort of a flagship riparian planting for the Watershed Council and work in conjunction with the Watershed Council, and also sort of take advantage of the unique ecology that can exist there. So we're looking forward to the experiment of making things grow there, just sort of out of our own personal interest. But I think I'm really looking forward to there being this gorgeous centerpiece in Pacific City that people drive by and eventually, you know, and ask, what is that lovely building? And hopefully somebody will say it's workforce housing.
Yeah.
You know,
be proud of it.
Yeah, that's gonna be awesome.
Yeah.
Sam.
Hi, so this is kind of a pitch because I am with the Fair Housing Council, so I got to represent the fair housing perspective. In response to Councilor Panamarov's really well-articulated question, you know, DLCD is considering statewide affirmatively furthering fair housing rules and working that into the new land use processes. None of those things have been finalized. Generally in AFFH stuff, what gets measured are things like school performance or access to you know, sources of employment or maybe access to transportation. Salem is a rare example where they actually measure like exposure to hazardous chemicals and seeing, you know, if environmental pollution is, there's a racial difference in those things. Why not make hazard planning part of that as well, right? If you have racial discrepancies or other protected class disparities in terms of who is actually at risk to these hazards, which are getting worse over time, then that should probably be something that DLCD is including in their evaluation of housing production strategies. So that's my pitch. Looks like Ethan might be the last person from DLCD who's here, so get him, go corner him.
I think that's it on our questions. Thank you so much again to our